So the first program that we're going to write is a very basic program where you add two numbers. So how do you define a number, a value in Python like this? This is a variable name and you say is equal to, let's say you say 1.5, right? When you say 1.5, that variable becomes a float, right? That becomes a float. But if you say 1, that variable becomes a integer. So that's you don't have to actually specify a variable type in Python. So if we say 1.5 and then we add another number 2 and we call it 6.3, and then that becomes the value of number 2 becomes 6.3. And if you want to add these two numbers, we can simply say this and we say number 1 plus number 2, right? And then we just want to display the output of it. So in Python you use print command, and with print command you use single quotes like this. So then you write whatever you want to write in it, for example the sum of two variables. Now because you're going to display a variable in Python, unlike C, in C you do %d, right? In Python you do this. So this means the first variable that you specify, and this is the second variable that you specify at the end of at the end of this. So then you want to put format, okay, that's the command, and then you specify number 1 comma number 2, and obviously you want to display sum as well, right? So you want to say 2 comma is, and when you say is, that will display sum. You can put 2 here, and this way all you have to do is put a bracket around it, right? So you got a bracket around the print command. So basically there are a few important things that you need to remember. You need to remember that you have this single bracket here, and this is format, and here you specify the parameter, and then sum is the third. So if we look at it, okay, if we look at it, what is the first parameter? The first parameter is this one. The second is 1. The third is 2. So number 1 will be printed here where we say bracket 0, and num2 will be printed here because it's just like arrays. It starts with 0 and go all the way up in a sequence. So this way, if you run this program, it is printing the sum of 2, 1.5, and 6.3 is 7.8. Okay, so this is a basic program in Python. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to also take some notes, and for that I need to enable screen notes in my computer. Screen notes here. There we go. Okay, so that's good. Now I can take some notes as well. So just to again explain it to you, this is the print command, and this one means print this value here. This means print this, and this means print this. In C language you do %d instead of this. So here you have to do 0, 1, 2. So what if I do here 0 as well, and here I do 0? What will it print? It will print only number 1, number 1, number 1, right? If you run it, it's a sum of 1.5 is 1 and 1.5 is 1.5. Why? Because it's only picking up the this one is basically correspond to this. This one also 0, so it will correspond to this as well, and this 0 will also correspond to this. So that's why you need to do here 0, 1, and 2, so that it can take care of the other two as well, the sum and this one. So this is how this is done. So let me clear this. Okay, now next thing what we need to do is we need to write another program, and that this time we're going to do a program that is going to display the sum of integer values, right? So what's the difference between integer? All we have to do is remove this and it becomes integer. Everything becomes integer. Now we print it and it will print 1 and, oh sorry, I have to change it here, right? So it's 1 and this is 2, okay. Now I do it, it says sum of 1 and 2, 1 and 6 is 7. See here I say 1, 6 and this is sum. So it will become 7. Let's do a little bit zoom in if we can. Yeah, that's better, right? More visible. Okay, so now moving on to this. These are the basics. So if you want to add a program to, let's say, take two numbers from the user, and then you want to add them, that becomes a little tricky. Why? Because when you put the number yourself, like in here, okay, and it is decided if it is a float or integer by just assigning it. So if you say 1 1 is equal to 1, that is taken as an integer. If you num1 is equal to 1.5, okay, that will be taken as a float. But if you take it from user, you use input command and it's always taken as a string, and then you need to convert it, because then if you take it as a string and add them together, then they are put into string and 1 and 6 will become 16 in string, right? But if it is integer, then 1 plus 6 will become 7. So if you say string 1 plus string 2, that is, they concatenate it, right? So let's see what I mean here, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use input command instead of storing it. I will say input and all I have to do is say enter first number, right? And then I do another input command and I say enter second number. Okay. Now when I do this, it will take from the user instead of storing it. But because I'm not converting it, it is take input command. This command here is basically this one. It takes anything. It will display this on the screen, take a value. This is what input does, and put it into number, as opposed to C language, for example, where you do a scanf, and in scanf you take you also specify %d, and then you first display the message and take the scanf. So this is not how you do it in Python. Python is simple. Python say number 1 is equal to input, and then you just display what you want to input and it will take it. So let's see what I mean by that. So I run that and then I'll show you how it works. So here you go. Let's run this. When I run this, it says enter first number. If I enter 1 here and then I enter 6 here, okay, that becomes 16. Did you see that, guys? Did you see this is 16 here, this one? Why 16? Because when this input is taken and this input is taken, this take it as a string, and then when it adds them together, it adds them as a string, and then the sum also becomes a string. And when you print them here, it prints them as a string. So what is the solution to this problem then? The solution to this problem is that you need to convert it before you either while you're taking it. So you can convert it here. No, you can convert it here while you're taking it. For example, here you can convert it while you're taking it. If you convert it here while you're taking it, then whatever you convert it into, it will store it as that variable type, right? So for instance, let's convert it while we're taking it, right? We convert it while we storing it. So here we will say integer, okay, and that's it. And then we do this integer, and that's also integer, and then we put here another one. Now when the value is taken, it converts into integer and put into number 1 and number 2. Now number 1 and number 2 becomes integer, and when you add two integer together, put into third variable, that also become integer. So if this is now integer because we converted this input into integer when we took it. Okay, this is also we converted this input into integer, and this become integer, and when the two integers are added and put into a third variable, that becomes an integer as well. Now none of that is string, so it will be absolutely fine to run it, and it will be 7 this time. So we say 1, then we say 6, and it will be 7. You see here it's 7. Now now there's another way around this to do the same thing, that you could also convert it instead of here, you could also convert it, we don't want to convert, we take it as a string, but when we are adding it, at that time we can convert it, right? At that time we can convert it. Now what's the difference between converting it when we add it? The difference is that it will not define this, when it takes the value here, it will be a string variable. Number 1 will be a string variable. Why? Because you've taken input, but then when you're adding them, you're converting just before you're adding them, so you're not really converting the variable, you're just converting the value inside it. And then some will definitely be an integer. Why? Because you are converting to this value and this value into integer, and then adding them, putting in some become integer. But as number 1 and number 2 will remain as a string, although it will add them because you are converting it. So that's the difference between converting it here or converting it at the bottom. So let's learn this by example. I'll explain this with an example. So for example, I put here 1, I put here 6. It will give you 7. Absolutely right. Why? Because we just converted it, as I explained. We converted it here, we converted it here, and it becomes integer, and then we added them into sum. Now another thing I want to do, if I why this number 1 and number 2 is still a string, I'll show you why. If we say sum, let's say sum1, we do another variable and do num1 plus num2, okay, and we also display here, and sum1 value is, and we put here 3, and we also display here sum1. Sum1 will concatenate it because sum1 is string. You know why it's string? Because we are converting it here, right? We are converting it here, not up there, here. So it will display this will be an integer, but this line is still take number 1 and number 2 as a string because we didn't convert it there. We are converting just before we're storing it. So let's see, and this way the answer would be the sum of 1 and 6 is 7, and it will also display, and sum1 value is, and that will concatenate them, it will be 16. So let's see if you understand what I mean by this. So we say here 1, we say here 6, and that becomes 7, and you see the value here, it says this one, it says 16. Why? Because this is a result of this sum here, and this sum is still string. When we print it here, this sum1, it prints a string here, this one, okay, this one is still a string, okay. Now what is the solution to that? If we want the whole thing to be converted into an integer, then we don't need to convert it here, we need to convert it up there, and it is for every, convert the whole variable instead of just the use of it. So integer, this one, and integer, this one, and then we run it, and it will be 6, 7 on both accounts. Okay, see, the sum, oh, this is 1 and 7, the 1 and 7 is 8, and sum 1 is also 8. Why? Because we have converted it here. So it save it as integer, you know, and then when we do this sum or that sum and print it here and here, you know, these ones, it will print them as an integer. Now going back to another thing that I want to explain it to you. is that you can do float as well here. You know, you could do simply a float here like this. Okay, you could do float. You can convert into float, and float will be now a decimal value, right? So if you run this one, you enter 1 and 2, it will put a 0.0 to it. See, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and this way the sum is 3.0 and all that. So this is the second example where I explained you how you can convert the type of a variable, right? And I did that with a float. Now we're going to move on to the next step where we see the if-else conditions, right? The control structure. Now I'm going to explain you in this video how the control structure works. So let me actually take it as a, we can do it here. So we want to write a small program that takes a float value in, one float value is enough, I think. Yeah, a float value called number, and we want to see if number is positive or negative. If it's greater than 0, it's positive. If it's less than 0, it's negative. And how would we do that? We simply say if, okay, no brackets, number, okay, greater than 0, and then we do colon. This is what we do in Python. We put a colon there, and then we say print, and that print would be like this. This positive number, okay, and then we go to else part, and else part would be like this. If that's the code, number is equal to 0. If it is 0, if it's equal to 0, then that number is what? 0, right? Print number is 0. I'll just say 0 is okay. 0. And the third one is else. So this is how you do if, else if, else. This is the ladder of if. And then we need to do print, and then we say this is a negative number. So this is, and when you run this program, it will tell you if number is positive or negative, right? If you enter a negative number, it will say. Now, one thing you must remember, and that is that this is if, the else if has to be exactly under it, because indentation could be an error in Python, okay? And then else has to be exactly under it. And similarly, the print has to be under, if you want this print to be under this else, you have to align it like this, okay? Same this one, same this one. So that it basically under same control structure. If you move it up and backward, it will be out of that control structure because there are no brackets. Do you see any brackets? Yeah? You don't see any brackets, right? So how would you know this is, the statement is under this or that? Because of the indentation. Now let's run this one and see the output for ourselves. Okay, the first number, enter the first, there's only one number I'm going to enter 5. What is 5? Positive, negative, or 0? It's positive, so it will display positive number. I run it again and I enter minus 10, and that is a negative float, right? It will say negative number. And if I do 0, it will say 0. Why? Because we have put it that way in the control structure using if else. So this is a small program to tell you how the positive, negative, and 0 number is done in Python. Now the famous, in the next video, what we're going to do is show you how odd and even number is done, right? That's a famous thing to do in any language, odd and even number. So let's do this. So in this video, what we're going to do, explain you odd and even number in Python. So how would we do that? Let's get rid of this code. So you take a number, okay, and then you want to do if structure, right? You want to do if. Do you remember how we do check if it is odd or even? You can put a bracket around it if you want to, and 2, %2, And if percentage 2 is equal to 0, that is an odd number. And then this is how you do it. You put a colon next to it, and then you say print, okay, and then you say and this time you want to say the number is odd, right? You want to say this, right? You want to say the number is even. You can say there is an even number, okay. That's it, right? It's not a printf, by the way. It's not C language. It is Python, okay. And the second is else. If it is not, simply say else, and you print it as, what do you print it as? Is an odd number. It's an odd number, right? If it is not equal to 0, right? And that's it. This is simple how it is, odd and even. So if you run it, do you see the similarities between C language? Because you see the percent in C language, right? In C language, you use the percentage sign here, this one. Number %2 equal to 0. The only difference is in C, you put a bracket like this, okay? And here you don't do that, you know. What you do is, you just put a colon at the end, this one, okay? And that's it. And this is how your if statement is done, and this is under if, and this is how your else statement is done, and this is under else. And then you run it, it will absolutely give you the right answer, and you can just take my word for it, right? So if I say 13, 13 is 13 an even number or odd number? That is an odd, right? So it will give you an error. That's unexpected. I was expecting error there, but let's see. What is the problem in your opinion? What do you think went wrong? What went wrong is that you cannot find the remainder of a float number. Remember in C, I also explained this is a float. We're converting it to float. See here? When we convert it to float, this becomes float. This one here. So we cannot convert it into float and then take a remainder. No, float remainder doesn't work with float. So what do we have to do to get rid of this error? We have to convert into integer. We convert into integer, then you can take a remainder of this, right? And it will work hopefully fine. So if we do 13 now, it says is an odd number, see? And if we run it again and we say 12, it is an even number. Now what if you want to say, not say, is an even number? That's an odd thing to say, isn't it? I mean, is an even number. Look at this. You want to say 12 is an even number. How would you print 12 there then? Let me show you how you will print 12. Okay. So what you do here is, here you say again like this, 0, like I told you, and then you have to do a format at the end. Okay. And you do dot format. Okay. And then you put here number like this, and it will print it here to whatever the number value is. Number value would be 12. It will say 12 is an even number. And similarly, you could do it here. 0 is an odd number, and then you do dot format, and then you do number, and this will do this. So let's do this now. Okay, so I say 12, it will say 12 is an even number now. See that? 12 is an even number. So where this line is coming from? So this 12 here, this 12, this one is because of this. Okay, and because it will place this form, you format it and you put number. So this will place it here 12, because value of number is when you enter it is 12, because you entered here 12 and it become 12 when you put it there, and then you say place even number, and same goes with the odd number when you print it. So this is how you can place it, and that's a substitute, that's an alternative of %d in C language. In C language you do %d, here you have to do 0, and then if the next variable you have to do 1, third variable you have to do 2. Whereas in C language you do %d, %d, %d. Wherever we say in a sequence it prints it, right? And that's how this one is done. So this is basic even and odd number examples, and I'm going to move on to now the next program where we're going to do a bit more complex stuff. What would be a complex? The complex stuff would be, and you have done this so many times, right? Larger numbers, finding larger number. So we're going to do that in next video, right? So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a larger number. I'm going to take 3 numbers as an input, okay? 3 numbers as an input. So how many numbers you want to take as an input? 3. Okay. So this is number 1, and all those numbers we want to take it as an input as an integer, right? Because you want to find a larger number. Okay. Yeah. Here you go. We already converted them. This is number 2, and this is number 3. So you took 3 numbers as an input. Okay. You converted them into integer, and then you want to find out what is the largest number. So then you put if else. Remember, how did we do largest number in C language? Do you remember that? You say if first one is greater than or equal to second one, and first one is greater than or equal to third one, then first one is greatest, right? Simple. Number 1 is greater than or equal to number 2, and the funny thing is, in C language you do and like this, right? But here you don't do it like this. This is wrong, right? This is not how you do and. This is not how you do and in Python. This is wrong, right? So what is right then? The right is, okay, let me explain you what is right. Right is and. You just say it and. See how simple it is. Because it's more like in English. That's why I love Python. Python is very much like English language. And what is the next statement you want to say? And you want to put it in bracket so it's neat and tidy, right? What do you want to say next? Number 1 is greater than or equal to? Number 3. Yes, greater than or equal to number 3. And this way we have determined now what this would say? What is the largest number? And then you need to say largest is equal to number 1. Now another good thing about Python is that you don't have to ever define a variable. You don't have to say integer largest equal this or define an integer up there, right? So you don't have to do it. You just start using it and it will do what it is supposed to do, right? And that's it. Okay. And the next one is, if we carry on with this, the next one is, what is the next one? Next one is, what else we do? Did you get that? You don't have to define a variable. You don't have to define a variable. You just use the variable and get defined. And how would it get defined? How would we know if largest is an integer, float, or string? Why? Because we took number 1 as a string and we converted it into integer. So this number 1 becomes an integer, and when this becomes an integer, we save it into largest, and largest become an integer as well. That's how compiler decide what variable that would be. We don't specify it as an integer deliberately. We don't do that, but by the virtue of knowing what the other variable that we're storing in, which is number 1. If number 1 is float, the largest will become float. If number 1 is string, the largest will become string. So it will all depend on what number 1 is. So it's an integer because we said so here. So it will become an integer. Now let's move on to the next part is else. So in else it's not else, it's else if, like this, right? So what would be that? It would be number 2 greater than equal to number 1 and number 2 greater than equal to, this is how you find the greatest, right? Number 3. Why are we saying number 3 here? Why? Because here, if you look at it, we have already compared number 1 with number 2 and number 3. So number 1, if number 1 is greater than number 2 or number 3, it will come here. If not, then we don't need to compare again number 1. We want to see if number 2 is greater than number 1 or equal to number 1 and number 2 is greater than, so the remaining 2 we compare. Okay, and similarly, if that is true, then what would be the greatest number, largest number? That would be number 2, right? Right? And the third one is else part. And else is simple. In else, we have only one left, and that is, and by the way, you need to do this colon at else, right? This colon here at the end of it, and also at the end of this. You need to do this, otherwise you get an error, this colon, because that is a code syntax. And when you say largest number equal to number 3, and then you get the largest. And now we need to just print it, right? That's the only thing left. Print, and then we say the largest number. The largest number is, and then we comma, we say largest. Now we're not formatting it. Why we're not formatting it? Because it will just print it as a whatever it is. We don't have to format it, right? So it's not a float, right? It's just will print it as it is. So let's do this. Number 1, let's say 23. Number 2, 4. Number 5. So what one is the largest? 23, right? So it's a, oh sorry, you know what happened here? Do you see what happened? Yeah, number 1 is, but it didn't print the output. Why? This is another point I'm trying to make here. You see here, this is the if-else alignment. Anything comes under this alignment would be part of else. So this would be part of else. So if you want this statement to be outside else, you need to align it backward. But otherwise, anything that comes under this, so you can put 10 statements there. You know, for example, you can put 10 statements here. For example, here you this one, if you put any statement underneath this, that will become part of this. So you need to move it backward like this.
So space matters.
It does matter, because if I say, let's say, if I do this, right? So now it is aligned with this, right? Yeah. That means that's part of else. Any statement here would be part of this if, because we don't have brackets in Python. And that's why when I run it, right, you'll see when I run it, it will not print. You know, I say 23, 2, 6, 4, 6, and it's not printing. Why? Because it's part of else. If you want to really see if it will definitely not print, right? So how do we get it printed then? Yeah, how do we get it printed? Push it backward, right? So that it is out of this. Bingo, it's printed. 23 is the largest number. So this is the simple program that explains you how you can compare the 3 numbers together, smallest, largest, and the one. So up to here, we have explained how you define a variable, how you convert a variable, how you store a value, how you add values, how you do if-else, how you do odd numbers, how you do largest, finding largest or smallest. Smallest would be the similar, right? So now let's do another thing here before I close this down. If I do float here, what would happen? When it takes the value, it becomes a float, right? And then all the variable will become float. Even the largest will become float. It will, you know. So if I run this one, and now I do 23, 4, and 6, it is saying 23.0. Why? Because I told you so. I told you in the beginning that we don't define a variable. That variable takes its type from the variable we're storing into it. So for example, here we're storing a float. So we didn't define it number 1 as a float. It becomes a float because we're storing it. We're taking an input and converting it into float. Now, if we don't put the float here, you will not get the right answer because input would be string, and you can't compare string, right? So that's why you have to do this typecasting, they call it, the conversion, right? So with this, I'm going to stop here. because this explains you the three things in this video. One, how to find the largest and smallest number, how to find even and odd number, and how to simply, I think the first program, do you remember the first program, what it was? The first program we did was a simple negative and positive number, and then also simple how to add two numbers. So these take care of most of the operation in Python.